Can a man who drove to every checkup, signed every school form, and read every bedtime chapter really be the neglectful father I described to our friends, my sister, and eventually a family court judge? I walked into that hearing room with a petition I had spent 3 months building, certain the children and the house would come to me, because I was the one who understood what good parenting looked like. But what I did not prepare for was what his lawyer placed on the table, and what my own phone had been quietly handing over all along. My name is Vesna Oral, and I am 36 years old, and I am a school counsellor at Haverford Day School, a private elementary where I spend my days guiding other people's children through their emotional problems. I have a master's degree in child psychology. I understand behaviour and patterns and the stories people tell themselves to survive. And the problem that I was not willing to see for a long time is that the most sophisticated story I had ever told belonged entirely to myself. I am the mother of Maya, who is 8 and observant in the way that quiet children are observant, and Theo, who is 5 and has seasonal asthma and the energy of a boy who treats every room as a running track. My husband is Doran, who is 38 and works as a structural engineer at an architecture firm downtown, and who is patient and precise in a way I spent years describing to other people as emotional distance. I also had a man named Crispin Halser in my life, a pack parent at the school, someone who told me I was exceptional in a way Doran never had. 7 months inside that belief is where this story begins. The afternoon things started to unravel was an ordinary Thursday. I took Theo to his asthma follow-up at Ashford Paediatric Clinic and told the receptionist while signing in that I was there alone again, that I managed these appointments by myself. Theo sat in the red waiting room chair and counted things. The antiseptic hand gel on the wall dispenser fired every time the door opened, and the room smelled sharply clean. Doran arrived at 3:34, his jacket sleeve dusted from a site inspection, and he kneeled down to speak to Theo before he even looked at me. On the file folder above the sign-in sheet, I could see his name listed as accompanying adult for the last 3 visits. I did not look at it for long. In the pharmacy queue on Clover Street afterward, I called my sister Berta and told her I had managed another appointment alone while Theo counted floor tiles at my feet. That evening, the family tablet lit up on the kitchen counter. Backup complete. Vesna's iPhone. 1,847 items synced. Doran was standing there when it fired. He read it, set the tablet face down, and picked up his coffee. The PAC meeting at Haverford Day School was on a Thursday evening, and the first-floor meeting room smelled of dry erase marker and coffee that had been sitting in the carafe since 4 in the afternoon. I arrived at 5:45 for what I told Doran was the official 6 o'clock start, but the set-up committee that began at that hour consisted of myself and Crispin Halse, who was already in the corner chair with his laptop open when I came in. He adjusted his seat a few degrees toward me without speaking, a movement so habitual between us by then that neither of us registered it anymore. The meeting covered fundraiser logistics for the Alderton Community Centre event in 3 weeks, and Crispin and I sat 2 chairs apart and performed professional deference with the particular care of people using distance to look like neutrality. 2 other PAC parents, Tanya and Owen, were present for the full hour, and the agenda moved efficiently through venue contacts, volunteer rosters, catering decisions, and the audio setup for the podium. Crispin and I disagreed once mildly about the order of the speakers, and that mild disagreement was the most honest-looking thing we did all evening because it required no performance. Tanya took notes on a yellow pad. Owen refilled his coffee twice. After the meeting, while the others were gathering coats, I mentioned to the room that the fundraiser felt particularly meaningful this year because I had been managing the children's school logistics largely by myself, and events like this reminded me why community support mattered. Tanya said she understood. Owen said his wife felt the same way. Crispin poured himself the last of the carafe and said nothing. Afterward, I walked to the parking lot, and Crispin followed 4 minutes later. We stood beside his car near the service gate for 9 minutes. A second-grade parent named Yuki was coming around the building with her phone out for the school newsletter Instagram, taking photos of the lot. And in the background of the second photo, Crispin and I were visible, close, partially behind the car door, but identifiable by anyone who knew our faces. The photo went up the following morning. I did not know about it until 2 days later when Philippa forwarded it with a question I did not answer. The following Saturday was the spring fair. The evening before, I told Maya that Daddy was probably busy and might not make it, and she said okay, in the careful way she says okay when she is absorbing rather than agreeing. On Saturday morning, Doran arrived at 10:15 and found her at the craft table. Maya said, at a volume that reached 2 neighbouring parents, that she thought Daddy was busy. He kneeled and told her he would not miss the fair. She looked at me. I said I had not been certain of his plans. Tanya Brez heard this and said nothing, but mentioned it to Owen, who mentioned it to his wife, who mentioned it to Philippa within 10 days. Sunday evening, with the children in bed, Doran sat across from me at the kitchen table and waited until I set the school letters down. He said he wanted to ask about the fair. He named the date and location and showed me the parent check-in confirmation email the school system sent to his phone at 10:09 that morning, showing his arrival time on the official record. Just the reflex of a person who keeps evidence of what matters to him. He asked why Maya had been told the night before to expect him to be absent for an event he had confirmed in a text she read on Friday at noon, and he asked for a direct answer rather than a general account of the household dynamic. I told him presenting a read receipt in a marriage conversation was controlling behaviour. I said I managed 2 children's expectations in a household where confirmed plans were not always reliable, and I did not appreciate being interrogated over a sentence I said to an 8-year-old. I said I was an educated professional in child development, and I made parenting calls based on experience, and whatever he thought a text thread proved was something to reflect on privately. I picked up the letters and went back to sorting. He said he heard me and would raise it again when there was more space. He went to the study and I heard the filing cabinet drawer open and close once. A few minutes later, he came back to the doorway and said one more thing. He was asking her to stop describing him as an absent parent to other people, because Maya and Theo heard the conversations around them, and he was not going to let either child grow up carrying a version of their father that the documented record could not support. He said it without raising his voice and went back to the desk. In the week after that, I opened the shared filing cabinet to find Theo's prescription record and saw a thin, clear folder on Doran's side that had not been there before. It held 3 or 4 pages I did not open. I went to the kitchen, poured water, and called Berta. I told her Doran was becoming paranoid and controlling, and she agreed without asking what he had actually said. The following week, after I posted a brief reflection on the school newsletter about supporting children through a difficult season, Tanya sent it to the parent group chat with heart emojis and a note calling me an inspiration. I read this at Crispin's car outside the service gate and felt no contradiction because I had decided there was none. I was providing stability and being recognized for it, and those 2 things felt identical at the time. When I got home that night, Doran was at the kitchen table going through Maya's school folder, flagging permission slips that needed signatures. He had already signed 2 of them. He asked how the PAC meeting went, and I said fine. He asked whether the community centre booking was confirmed for the fundraiser. I said yes. He said he had put the date in his calendar and assumed they were both going. I said of course. He said good and went back to the folder. There was nothing accusatory in any of it. He was doing what he always did, managing the logistics of the family with the same orderly attention he brought to everything, and I was in the same room doing a completely different calculation. He looked up once more before going upstairs and asked whether she had heard anything about the newsletter photo that Yuki posted, because Maya mentioned it at dinner and he wanted to understand what the context was. I said it was just a community photo. He said he understood and went to bed. The Alderton Community Centre fundraiser was a Thursday evening in late spring, and the main hall held 300 seats at round tables with white linen and the warm combined smell of garlic and olive oil from the Mediterranean catering meeting, the cooler air from the ceiling vents. String lights ran along the cornice. At the donor table near the back, a man named Augusto Ferras sat in a dark blazer, fourth seat from the left, and watched the room fill from 6:45 onward with the patience of a man who does not attend events to be entertained. Doran was at a middle table with two colleagues from Holt and Senna and their spouses, at a placement I chose in the seating chart, far enough from the podium that a speaker could look across the room without direct eye contact, close enough that nothing said at the podium was unclear. I was at the Parsi coordination table near the front, in the green dress I chose because it photographs well. Crispin was at a separate donor table across the room. Berta was in the third row. Philippa had said she had a prior commitment. The formal program began at 7:30. After the principal and the community centre director, the PAC chair introduced me as the parent volunteer coordinator who had carried the organisational work with remarkable dedication, and I stepped to the podium with the index cards I did not need. My speech ran 5 minutes. In the fourth paragraph, I said that the parents I respected most were the ones no one applauded, the ones who showed up to every paediatric appointment and every school gate and every 3 in the morning fever, quietly, without recognition, and often without support. I said I knew this because I was one of them, that doing it alone was the invisible labour that kept children stable, and I hoped the room acknowledged the people who carried that weight without being asked. At the middle table, one of Doran's colleagues leaned toward her husband and said something low. Doran turned a water glass a quarter turn with 2 fingers and set it back down. He did not move otherwise. At the donor table in the back, Augusto did not applaud. He opened the event programme and wrote something in the margin with a short pen from his breast pocket. After the podium, Crispin caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass a half-inch. I straightened in my chair and the straightening was visible to anyone watching. At 9:15, while Berta was at the far end of the room with the catering staff, I stepped into the side corridor to answer a school logistics text. Doran followed a minute later. The corridor was empty. A water fountain, a coat rack, a fluorescent strip that buzzed faintly above the doorframe. He stood at a respectful distance and said he wanted to ask about the speech. He named the fourth paragraph, the main hall, the 7:30 programme, and the audience that included 2 of his project managers from Holt and Senna, who now had a specific account of his parenting delivered in front of 300 people. He named the seating chart she had sent him, placing him at a table of professional contacts close enough to hear everything. He said he had accompanied Theo to 11 of the last 14 appointments at Ashford Clinic, and his name was on the visit record each time, and he asked whether that record qualified as the kind of unsupportive absence she had described at the podium, and he wanted an actual answer rather than a reframing of his question. He said in the same measured tone that he would not attend another community event or professional gathering where his parenting was characterized as deficiency in front of witnesses, and he offered to go home right now and talk about this at the kitchen table with no audience. I told him I had been waiting for him to make the speech about himself. I said a woman who spoke honestly about the invisible weight of parenting was not required to submit an attendance ledger to her husband afterward, that the speech was about a shared experience, and that the fact that he heard himself in it was his own interpretation. I said I was going back inside, and I did. At 9:45, as the room cleared, Augusto found Doran near the coat rack and shook his hand with the 2-handed grip he had used since Doran was 12. He said he heard the speech and had been at 6 school parent events himself as a community donor, and Doran was present at every one of them. He also mentioned that before the event started, he overheard Vesna at the donor registration table tell the events manager that once the property situation was settled, she could commit to a 3-year donor relationship. He had written the phrase in the margin of the event programme with his breast pocket pen. He still had the programme and had already decided to keep it. Doran asked him to hold on to it. I was at the PAC table signing evaluation forms and did not see their exchange. That night, Doran arrived at Holton Senna after the event and sat at his workstation in the dark for several minutes before turning the desk lamp on. His colleague Preet asked from across the open floor whether he was all right. He said he was fine. He opened the inspection file on his screen and did not go home until close to midnight. A calendar notification fired on his phone when he got in the car. Ferris, Casa Florinda, Wednesday, 7 p.m. He confirmed the entry and drove. On the drive home from the fundraiser, I called Berta and she said the speech was perfect and that the room was clearly moved by it. I said I had only wanted to be honest. She said that was exactly what made it powerful, and I felt the particular satisfaction of someone who has told a true story and been believed, which was, I told myself, all it had ever been. The fact that Doran was in the audience was not my responsibility to manage. What I did not register, driving home with the city going dark on either side, was that Augusto's small pen had written 5 words in the programme margin, once the property situation is settled, and that those 5 words, in a retired engineer's careful hand, would appear 3 months later in a signed statement delivered to a courthouse filing office. He drove home by his usual route and did not call anyone that night. He simply noted what he had observed, the way people who spend careers reviewing structures for hidden faults always note what they observe. The visit to Irene's apartment was my idea, and I arrived without calling ahead, which was something I had never done in 11 years of knowing my mother-in-law. The apartment at Kenmore Tower smelled of lavender sachets and old wood from the bookshelf that had once held Doran's childhood paperbacks, and the framed photographs of Maya and Theo on the sideboard were the kind of display that makes a room feel like a record of a life rather than decoration. I told Irene I needed to speak to someone who genuinely knew the family. I said I had been managing everything alone for a long time. I said I was not angry at Doran but worried about the effect on the children of having a father who was present in the house but emotionally unavailable, and that I did not know how much longer I could carry the weight before it affected Maya and Theo's sense of what a stable family looked like. I cried, not loudly, but in the controlled way that registers as genuine to someone who has not seen the pattern before. I named 2 specific dates as evidence: March 4th, when I said he missed Theo's bronchial episode appointment, and April 12th, when I said he did not attend Maya's school performance. Irene poured tea and listened and said she hoped they could find a way through. I drove home believing the family's sympathy had been secured. That same evening, Irene called Doran. She told him about the visit and named both dates. He was quiet for a moment and then said, March 4th was Theo's bronchial appointment, and he was the one who took Theo that day, and Irene was there herself for an unrelated GP visit in the same building at the same hour and walked past them in the corridor and waved through the waiting room glass. April 12th was Maya's school performance, and Irene attended and sat in the 3rd row, and Doran was 2 seats to her left in the 4th, and she had passed him Maya's spare cardigan when Maya looked cold under the stage lights. Irene went silent for 12 seconds. She said she would sort it in her own way. On Wednesday evening at Casa Florinda, Doran and Augusto sat at the corner table near the left wall bar, in the warmth and noise and smell of garlic bread and espresso. Augusto told Doran what he observed at the community centre: the speech, the exchange of glances with Crispin, the half-raised glass. He said he had known Doran since he was building model bridges at 9 years old and was not going to state what he thought he saw without being direct. He repeated the phrase from the donor registration table, once the property situation is settled, and showed Doran the event programme with the margin note. He had already decided to keep it. Doran asked him to hold on to it and said very little else. That Thursday evening, while I was at Philippa's apartment, Doran was home alone with the children settled after dinner. He went to the shared filing cabinet in the study and took out his personal documents, his national insurance records, both children's birth certificates, the mortgage papers, the school enrollment forms, the household insurance policy. He placed them in a dark blue zip folder and put it inside his work briefcase, which he moved from the hall cupboard to under the study desk. He left the filing cabinet drawer open a half-inch but did not take anything belonging to me. When I came home at 10:45, I asked about the open drawer. He said he had been looking for the car insurance renewal. I went to bed. At Philippa's that evening, I outlined the plan. The petition, the custody argument, the case that I had been the primary caregiver, the house staying with the parent who provided the children's stability. I said Doran would not contest it because contesting it would require him to document engagement he could not sufficiently prove. Philippa poured wine and then asked, setting her glass down carefully first, whether I was sure about the documentation angle given that Doran had always seemed genuinely involved from what she had seen at school events. She said she was not arguing, only wanting to make sure the plan was solid before it became a formal step. I told her I was a professional in child development and had assessed the situation from expertise. She nodded. She did not say I was right, which was what she usually said, and I did not notice the absence. On Saturday morning with the children at Irene's, Doran sat across from me at the kitchen table while I had the laptop open. He said he wanted to talk about the family and what they both wanted for the children. He named the visit to Irene's apartment and both dates I had cited. The detail he introduced was a clinical photograph taken by the nursing assistant at Ashford Clinic on March 4th for Theo's digital patient file, showing the accompanying adult beside Theo's height measurement, standard practice at the clinic, sent to both registered parents afterward, showing Doran's face. He asked why I told Irene he was not present on those 2 dates, and he said he was asking the way an engineer asks whether a load calculation was a rounding error or a deliberate adjustment, because the answer determined what kind of problem they were dealing with. He named his boundary. He would not allow his children to be raised with a false account of their father's involvement in any private or formal setting. He offered, one final time, to go to a family mediator together, any professional she chose, because he would rather work through this with a neutral party than let it reach a stage that could not be undone. I closed the laptop. I told him the conversation was over. I said I was not going to sit across from a man who photographed his own child's clinic visits as surveillance material and called it love. I said I knew what I had observed across 8 years of marriage, and I did not need his records to revise my experience. I picked up my phone and went upstairs. The bedroom door closed with the firm click of a mechanism fully engaged. On Sunday, Maya came back from Irene's and said at the dinner table that Grandma Irene remembered when Daddy carried her school bag on every field trip. Maya offered this as a piece of information, not a criticism. She was simply repeating what Grandma said. Doran passed her the bread. I said that was a lovely memory, and the rest of dinner was quiet. The evening after the Casa Florinda dinner, Doran went to bed before 10 without discussion. In the morning he made the children's lunches the way he always did. Maya's sandwich in halves, Theo's apple in quarters, without being asked and without announcing it, which was the way he had always shown up and which I had spent years describing as the absence of something. On a Tuesday afternoon at the Redland Street pickup curb, I arrived at 3:12 and found Crispin's car 4 spots ahead in the parent line. We had been careful about the school premises since the newsletter photo and did not acknowledge each other. At 3:15, Doran appeared at the school gate on foot from the crosstown bus. Maya's classroom teacher, Ms. CO, was managing the release, and when she saw Doran, she brightened in the particular way teachers respond to parents they recognize as consistently present. She handed him a printed permission slip for the end-of-year field trip and said she was hoping to see him because the digital version had bounced back. He signed it on the gate railing, handed it back, and she thanked him and said the children had been wonderful that week. I watched all of this from my car. He came to pick up on a day I had not told him I would be there, signed a form I did not know existed, and Ms. CO spoke to him with the ease of someone who knew his face from regular appearances. I made the decision at that curb watching a teacher hand my husband a permission form. Not later in Calver's office, not in a long call with Berta. Here, in this specific moment, I decided to act first. Thursday morning, Doran arrived at Civic Federal Bank on the corner of Clover and Marsh at 9:10. He opened a personal checking account in his name only and redirected his direct deposit from the firm. He did not close the joint account. He was at his desk at Holt & Senna by 10:30. He called HR that afternoon to update the benefits portal direct deposit, a 3-minute call on his personal mobile that he stepped into the corridor to make. Thursday afternoon at 2, I was at Threshold and Vance Family Law with Berta in the waiting room. My lawyer Calver had the petition on the table. 14 specific incidents of alleged parental absence, primary physical custody of both children, exclusive use of the marital home at 14 Linwood Drive, interim sole management of the joint household account. Calver asked whether I was certain about the documentation, whether the specific absence dates were verifiable, because the respondent would contest each item on the record. I told him I had professional expertise in child development and my account was based on sustained observation over years. He said to proceed. I signed. The notary stamped it. The filing was registered at 2:47. Berta was outside taking a client call and missed the final 5 minutes. Philippa, who was supposed to come as a character witness reference, texted Berta at 2:30 saying she had a deadline. I was told this after the petition was already filed, and I said it was fine. Thursday at 11:14 at night, I was passing the study door and the screen of Doran's phone lit briefly on the desk. He was asleep. The notification read, Automated backup completed. Vesna's iPhone. 4,312 items synced. The filing cabinet on his side was partially open. The zip folder I had noticed the week before was gone from the drawer. I did not know it was in his briefcase under the desk. On the desk beside the phone was a sticky note in his handwriting. Marsh 9 a.m. Bring ID. I told myself the backup ran automatically and had nothing to do with anything, and I went back to bed and did not sleep quickly. Friday evening, Theo asleep and Maya at a friend's house, Doran was at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. He had made tea and there were 2 mugs. He gestured to one. He told me he had received notice of the petition from Calver's office at 4:30 that afternoon, without blame, holding his mug in both hands. He said he wanted to offer one final honest conversation before the matter became a formal proceeding. Not as a threat, but because a formal proceeding was going to surface material she may not have accounted for. The detail he named was the iCloud family plan, admin summary email, not the notification on my phone, but the plan administrator's summary, which fires when a backup exceeds a certain file size, arriving in his inbox at 7:02 Thursday morning. 4,312 items backed up from a device registered to my Apple ID. He was the plan administrator. He had known about the backup before I walked past the door that night. He asked me directly whether I had been aware, when I filed the petition, that the family iCloud plan I set up for the children's school iPads 2 years ago backed up my personal device continuously under my married account, and that this was accessible to the plan administrator. He offered 72 hours. He said if I withdrew the petition and agreed to engage a mediator together, he would not respond to the formal filing within that window. I told him the petition was filed because the situation had become untenable and I had made a decision to protect the children's stability. I said I was their mother and a child development professional, and the petition reflected an informed assessment, and a storage notification was not something I was going to use to withdraw a legal document. I set the mug down and said goodnight. He did not follow me. 20 minutes later, he went to the study, completed a draft email he had been working on, and pressed send at 9:47. The next morning, Saturday, his phone was charging screen up on the kitchen counter when I came down for water. A calendar notification fired while I was standing there. Alderton Family Courthouse, Room 2B, 9 a.m., with a date 15 days ahead. I read it. My hand on the glass did not move. The Friday before the hearing, I called Philippa to ask whether she had submitted the character witness letter. She said she had drafted it twice and both times found herself unable to sign it because she kept thinking about the spring fair and the parking lot photo and the fact that Doran had called her 2 weeks prior. Not to ask anything, just to say he wanted to make sure Maya and Theo had people around them who were honest with them. She said she was sorry, but she could not be a character witness for a version of events she was no longer certain was accurate. I said she was abandoning me. She said she was not abandoning anyone. She simply could not sign something she could not stand behind. The call lasted 4 minutes. I wore the grey blazer I put on for district conferences because I believed this was a room I knew how to manage. The corridor of Alderton Family Courthouse smelled of old carpet, and a water fountain near the stairwell dripped once every 8 seconds. Berta sat beside me outside room 2B. Through the narrow glass panel, I could see Doran already seated with a woman in a charcoal jacket, a tabbed binder open before her, and a sealed USB drive in an evidence bag at the corner. Marceline Thresh presented for 41 minutes. Clinic records. Doran as accompanying adult on 11 of Theo's last 14 appointments. Photographs corroborating 3 of the 4 absence dates I listed. School sign-ins. Doran at 19 of 27 events, myself at 9. The joint account cross-referenced against hotel records from a parallel matter involving Crispin Halse. A forensic report from the iCloud backup identifying threads in which evenings were described as covered for my account to my husband, and a thread with Berta including the phrase, "Once the petition names the incidents he will need to prove them wrong, and he will not have the paperwork." Augusto Ferris's statement, the fundraiser, the margin note, 6 school events where my petition said Doran was absent. My outgoing work email at 2:17 p.m. with links on documenting parental absence, sent 11 days before the earliest incident I listed. Judge Soul issued temporary orders. Primary residential custody to Doran Oral. Vacate in 21 days. Joint assets frozen. Child welfare evaluation within 30 days. I believed the petition was power. I filed first, named the terms, set the frame. What I had not understood was that filing first gave his lawyer a list of dates to match against records, because he attended, and attendance generates evidence in the ordinary course of life. The clinic photographed the accompanying adult as standard practice. The school server stored outgoing email. The iCloud plan ran for 2 years and 11 months because I set it up and forgot. The power was never in who filed first. It was in what was true and who had the record of it. In Berta's spare room, the light comes in east-facing at 6:45. Maya called Tuesday evening and talked for 22 minutes. She did not ask when Mommy was coming home. The HR review is ongoing and my office is locked. Crispin's Instagram shows a Saturday barbecue. The joint account is frozen. The children's bedroom lights are on at bedtime on Linwood Drive. Doran confirmed the visitation schedule by 5 o'clock on day 7, because he does what he says he will do, and I spent years calling it emotional distance.